Thanks for joining, everybody. We're just going to give it one more minute and then we'll get started. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So first of all, thank you everybody for joining. Really appreciate your time on this St. Patrick's Day. The hope is that next year, first of all, I'll leave you alone so you can all go to your bars and restaurants and have fun and be socializing. Hopefully we'll be in a place where that's possible. I firmly believe we will. I want to first start off by thanking the Township IT staff who's helping me pull this off, as well as my friend Robin Wallace, who's helping me in terms of the Q&A. Please do make sure that you're typing your questions into the Q&A. I'm going to be taking you through a presentation that I've prepared first, and then we'll go into it. So first, I want to take a moment to thank my colleagues who I know are on tonight as well. So Councilor at Large Bob Russo, thank you for joining. 4th Ward Councilman David Cummings, thank you for joining. And 3rd Ward Councilor Lori Price Abrams. So thanks all for joining us tonight, really. For the next 25 minutes or so, I'm going to take you through a presentation that I know addresses a lot of what the people of Montclair have asked me. Then following the presentation, I will answer questions that I've received both in advance from residents and through the Q&A. I have about 15 questions that I received in advance, and I know we already have questions coming in through the Q&A, so we will alternate between those pre-received questions and the questions in the Q&A. And again, after my presentation, Robin will help in terms of just reading those out loud for me to answer. I do hope that I get to answer every question tonight, but if I don't, know that we will have a follow-up conversation. And I just want to thank you in advance for your attention, for your engagement, and for your belief in this town and in our little democracy here, our little experiment. So first, I want to start off by acknowledging where we are just in terms of COVID. Obviously, March 9th marked a year since everything shut down. And in that time, we've unfortunately had 2,137 cases in Montclair and 68 deaths. So I'd like to ask you all to just join me in a quick moment of silence. Thank you. And please send your thoughts, your energy, your light, and your love to the families and friends of the 68 residents. That's a lot of people in town, a lot of empty chairs around the dining table, as our president would say. Yesterday, the Montclair Township Council passed a resolution, a proclamation, I should say, declaring March 9th as COVID Heroes Day. Really, really proud to do that. It's going to be a special day that we observe in perpetuity every year in Montclair. And I want to acknowledge COVID heroes across the board. So first, let me start with our Essex County COVID heroes. So a huge shout out to Essex County Executive Joe DiVincenzo, Joey D, to our health officer, Maya Lordo, and to our Essex County commissioners, including Montclair's own Brendan Gill, for running one of the best operations in the country. It has been written up in the press as being second to none in terms of a rollout of testing and now the vaccination program. Just an outstanding job. I also want to recognize my colleagues who I consider heroes as well. Mayor Spiller, Deputy Mayor Herlock, seen there delivering food to Tony's Kitchen, 4th Ward Councilor David Cummings running or volunteering for one of the many food drives that he's hosted or participated in. 2nd Ward Councilwoman Schlager and I out shopping to support local businesses during the pandemic. 3rd Ward Councilwoman Lori Price Abrams there seen donating food to one of our little pantries in town. and Councilor at Large Bob Russo making a donation to Tony's Kitchen. So again, just incredible demonstration of Montclair heroes. And the mayor's task force, Montclair Mayor's Task Force, Sean Spiller, and all the leaders of the task force. We have Shante Palmer and David Pasquale, who are the two chairs. And then we have former Mayor Ed Remsen, Roger Terry, my once opponent and now dear friend, and Raj Aman leading the subcommittees of the COVID task force. I also consider you heroes. And to everyone in the community, and this slide could not possibly capture everyone, but from our healthcare workers at Montclair Mountainside, to our first response team and township employees, to the COBRAs, to the teachers and the students having to learn how to virtual learn, Tony's Kitchen, the YMCA, Human Needs Food Pantry, Montclair Mutual Aid, Montclair Center Bid, Montclair Neighborhood Development Corporation, and so many more that I couldn't fit on this slide. It has been a beautiful thing to witness the compassion that people in this town have for one another and helping one another. I want to talk a little bit about vaccines and testing. So in terms of vaccines, just want to make everybody aware and continue to make you aware and ask you to also share this information. It's really important that seniors and people without access to the internet get this information as well. So don't assume somebody knows it. And I'll share this slide after to make sure everyone has it. So first of all, Essex County, the former Kmart next to Whole Foods on Prospect Avenue. You can go to essexcovid.org for scheduling both still your tests as well as vaccines. The state of New Jersey also is offering vaccines, which they're doing at locations in grocery stores and standalone pharmacies all over the place. You can go to that website that you see there. And then Montclair Township, we started last week deploying our own vaccines that we've been receiving from the state, specifically to senior citizens in senior buildings. And as we run through that dosage or those quantities, will be replenished and we'll continue to expand our own local program here. And then in terms of testing in town, 2 locations, MedRight at 50 South Park Street and Same Day Health at 300 Bloomfield Avenue. The email addresses, phone numbers, and websites for scheduling are all there. Please check with your insurance company and speak to them to make sure you understand if there is any billing liability for you. I want to talk about small business support and what that's looked like. So last year, Mayor Spiller, Deputy Mayor Herlock, and I, we launched the Love Our Montclair campaign with the rest of the council, which deployed all over Montclair. The previous council issued $150,000 and $1,000 grants to Montclair Township businesses, which we fully exhausted. And the Montclair Center Bid has issued $134,000 grants to businesses within the Business Improvement District, which is mostly along the Bloomfield Avenue corridor. And what I love is the collaboration I've seen between the Township Council, the community, and the Mayor's Task Force in terms of now seeing the Love Our Montclair campaign evolve into the Shop, Eat, Repeat campaign, preserving the Love Our Montclair hashtag. So Love Our Montclair, I think, will continue to be the overarching umbrella over all of our sort of economic development destination, just sort of having locals fall back in love with your institutions, arts and culture, parks, all of that. I see that as the overarching theme for our town, with campaigns such as Shop, Eat, Repeat laddering up to that. So very excited about that. And you can go to shopeatrepeat.com to see special deals and offers that Montclair local businesses have put forward to Montclair residents. So really cool synergy there, and really proud of everybody. I want to thank Councilwoman Schlager and the Department of Community Services. We had an idea, and we were able to pull it off, and it was a fairly simple idea. We're happy about it. There are now picnic benches in Erie Park on Walnut Street and in Watchung Plaza. We put those there so that you can hopefully grab food, grab takeout from the bagel store or any of the restaurants on Walnut Street or anything in Watchung Plaza, and go sit and enjoy in the park. We've seen people using them all the time. It's really a wonderful thing to see. That's just something small that we were able to do to help businesses in town. Now I want to quickly talk about the American Rescue Plan, the $1.9 trillion bill that Congress and the President passed last week. So first, thank you to our congressional delegation, Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill, Congressman Payne, Senators Booker and Menendez, for securing the money that they secured, not only for New Jersey, but specifically for Montclair. So out of $1.9 trillion, individuals are getting $1,400 if you make up to $80,000, and then couples $2,800 as well. Unemployment benefits extended through September. That's a $300 federal benefit that's extended. There's additional money to expand the earned income tax credit, the child tax credit. There's nutrition assistance. There's housing aid, rent, utility bill assistance. Very important for us here in Montclair, school aid for reopening schools specifically, and specifically for ventilation, PPE, and safety. There's childcare assistance, vaccine distribution, healthcare subsidies in terms of the Affordable Care Act, and small business relief, additional small business relief. So doubling down on some of the programs from last year's CARES Act. So additional money flowing through the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program and the popular Paycheck Protection Program. So please make sure you know what's available to you. I know there's money already landing in people's bank accounts, which is great. I also want to encourage you to go out and spend that money in Montclair. And Montclair's allocation of the $1.9 trillion budget is $3.8 million directly. So in addition to all the money that residents are receiving and that schools will receive, the government itself, the municipal government will receive $3.8 million. And these are the criteria that govern how we are able to spend that money. And this is what we will be using essentially as we shape the budget, which we anticipate first of all, deliberating throughout the month of April and then passing in the month of May. The hope is to obviously respond to the public health emergency, the economic impact of that, giving us the ability to make up for lost revenue that we've had. That helps us so we don't have to raise taxes, big deal, or lay anybody off, bigger deal. Allows us to make necessary investments in water, sewer, and what I'm excited about, specifically broadband infrastructure. So we're able to think about broadband infrastructure more broadly in Montclair, and how can we as a government look to extend the availability of that to seniors, to low-income households, while virtual learning continues, and then in perpetuity for people who have the need. And then to transfer aid to private nonprofit organizations, public benefit corporations, et cetera, that are involved with transportations of passengers, cargo, special purpose unit of the state or local government. So really cool stuff in there that we're very excited about and so grateful to the federal delegation for. I want to talk about rent stabilization, rent control. It is a hot topic. I know it's a hot topic. There's quite a lot of you on this. Many more will watch the YouTube video. My hope here is not to, I don't want to participate in what's been a really divisive conversation. I'm just interested in adding my perspective here, and I want to just share some thoughts and ideas. So first of all, the way I think about this is, how can we protect affordability in general in Montclair? And how can we stabilize rents for Montclair generations? And what I mean by that is different generations. You know, so many people have grown up here, have had their parents grow up here, their grandparents grow up here. And the fear that I hear a lot is people aren't able to afford to stay here, or families are getting split up or having to move out of town, or people are leaving, right? Which is really, really sad. And we want to try and do what we can. And I think we should do what we can to prevent that. And I speak from firsthand experience here. My parents, my sister, you know, they can't afford to live in Montclair, period, full stop. That's it. Can't afford to live here. And so, you know, I know what it's like to leave your hometown, to have to leave your hometown, and to be separated from your family because of affordability. So what I want to look at doing is, how do we build on the work that Mayor Spiller, Councilwoman Renee Baskerville from the previous council, and the entire previous council did, right? Like, I'm not interested in saying we should throw that out and start over. Let's build on that. The current law that was passed last year, that's on hold right now because of ongoing litigation and that may or may not face a ballot referendum, does not protect the majority of renters in Montclair. We need to be clear about that. 70% of renters in Montclair are not protected by the rent control ordinance. So my thought is, why don't we try and avoid a costly and divisive ballot referendum and try to negotiate? Let's get that off the ballot. And for example, what we can do, if we were open to permitting vacancy decontrol, we could gain the ability to, for example, switch from a variable or to a variable rate, I should say, from a fixed rate. So I'll give you an example. The rate right now in the rent control bill is 4.25%. It doesn't matter if you're in a recession. It doesn't matter if the economy is booming. It's 4.25%. My preference would be to see it be a variable rate, something that flexes with the economic conditions. And it could be set by the rent control board, for example, in Montclair, very much like New York City does. I'd also like to see us extend rent control protection to 2 and 3 family units. Those are the big categories of renters in Montclair that are left out of this bill, right? So if you live in a 3-family house, or you live in a 2-family house and you're a renter and it's not occupied by an owner, you're not protected. So why can't we extend rent control, rent stabilization, as I prefer to call it, to these individuals as well? And then going back to what I was saying earlier in terms of protecting multi-year generations, we should be talking about adding succession rights. This is, again, something that New York City does, where you can put your children on the lease, or your children can move in and then take over the lease. And that way, that house or that apartment can stay in the family and pass from one generation to another without the rent going up beyond the rent control cap. And then also a multi-year discount. So for example, if a 1-year lease was 4.25%, a 2-year lease could be 3.5%. And I've heard from many landlords and tenants that would really like to see an option like this because it gives everyone a sense of continuity and stability in the market. Now I want to talk about creating change, which is one of the main reasons why I ran for office, because I thought we can unstick some things in Montclair, and I'm particularly proud of a couple things. First and foremost, what we did with the leaf blower ordinance. And I want to thank Councilwoman Schlager and Councilman Bob Russo, who have led the charge and worked on this for years. And particularly Councilman Price Abrams and Mayor Spiller for working together with us on this to make it even better and to get it passed last month. Really important changes. This will be advertised in Montclair Local's upcoming newspaper next week. We're continuing to push this out to landscape companies so that they understand. But this is a fundamental change. We've essentially cut in half the number of days a year that leaf blowers can be used, answering to me what's been a cry from the community for us to do something different about this. And finally, also, since 3 years ago, this issue was kind of put on a shelf. I'm really proud that we were able to get the planning board to adopt the Safe Streets Plan. It's a big deal. It affects pedestrian safety, traffic flow, and bike lane safety as we go forward. As we develop and redevelop our infrastructure in Montclair, we now have to consider how people use our streets and our sidewalks. And for me, what's most important are crossings safely, whether you're on a bike, whether you're walking, or whether you're in a car. Really excited about the potential here for the future. And now this is going to be the thing that I know I'm going to get the most pushback on, if not the rent control stuff. But I'm not shy about dreaming big. And some of these are my campaign ideas, and some of these are other people's ideas, and some of these are ideas that my colleagues have worked on for years or proposed. And I'm not saying I have all the solutions here. I'm just saying to you, all of you who are watching this live now and who are going to watch it after, to dream big with me and participate in your government and help us get some of this stuff done. I really believe in a lot of what's possible here. So first, sort of following on the bicycle theme, we've got painted chevrons on some of our streets in Montclair. What I would truly like to see is for us to do our first dedicated bicycle route in Montclair. And for me, it's really about having a logical connection between 2 points of interest, right? I don't want to just do a bike lane on some street just to say we have a bike lane. There has to be logic. And so my proposal is that we have a connection from Bay Street train station to the commercial business district. And you can see it over here on the map here, just in terms of going along Glen Ridge Avenue. I'd like to see that happen. And with that, it would offer the ability to connect to the Essex Hudson Greenway, which I'll get to in a little while, connects to Bay Street, which is obviously a major transit hub, passes by Lackawanna Plaza, which we know is going to be a major development in town, and connects to the central business district. So there's a lot of logic in this being, I think, the first protected bike lane that we do in Montclair, and a really good test case for bicycle safety infrastructure in town. Let's keep dreaming bigger, right? 21st century, and dare I say 22nd century schools, right? We got to keep thinking about the future and what's possible. So we know the American Rescue Plan allocates money for ventilation upgrades. We know that we have an estimate from EI Associates for $27 million to bring our HVAC systems in the schools up to standard. So my hope is that the district is able to go after as much money from the rescue plan as possible to make as much of that possible happen. And look, everyone keeps talking about, from the president through the leaders in Congress through Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, a major, major federal infrastructure bill. So for me, it's about getting ready for it, right? Thinking about energy efficiency grants for the schools. We know buildings, government building upgrades are going to be part of that infrastructure bill. So windows, again, thinking about energy efficient solutions. I know we're doing solar on some of the school roofs. We've already passed that. And technology upgrades to the buildings, right? The integration of technology. We know more and more tablets and things have to be used. The expansion of Wi-Fi and broadband throughout schools and the strengthening of the signals. But the point here is that to get things shovel ready, right? And in this context, maybe not shovel, but to get things ready to go. We know Congress is going to most likely pass this bill at some point this year. Let's be ready to ask for that money. Let's be ready to ask for those grants and apply for those grants and make the case for why the investment in Montclair is worth it. And the other consideration is that we have record low borrowing costs right now, record low interest rates. So for me, in a generation's worth of time, in my lifetime, if we were ever going to borrow money to do big things in Montclair, to build or renovate, upgrade our school buildings, now is the time to borrow that money because we can finance it at record low interest rates, which means the cost to carry that debt for years would not compare to if we were to borrow it, obviously, at a higher interest rate. And we also recently refinanced all of our township debt at a much lower interest rate, thanks to where rates are today, saving us a fortune long term. So I think we're the best positioned we ever have been to make a big investment in our schools. Let's also dream big about a town hall, public safety, and community center, right? So many things that could possibly come together in one that we need. We need a senior and community center in Montclair. We need it. We need the programming for it. We need the actual physical space for it. My colleagues I know are passionate about this. Councillor Cummings, Councillor Russo, Mayor Spiller, everyone has talked about this. Everyone is on board with making a senior and community center happen in town. We need a new police station. Our police station over on Valley and Bloomfield is a very old building. Unfortunately, our police officers have to deal with mold, tight quarters. It's not exactly the best model in terms of public engagement for people to walk in or to engage with the police, to handle law enforcement or public safety issues. So we need to rethink that. We also need to rethink our crisis services and what that looks like. Can we have some sort of intake facility here in Montclair with counseling or crisis response and services on the ground? Our town hall, our court are all in very old buildings that are in poor shape that I don't think are going to last my lifetime. So we need to be thinking about the 5 to 10 year time frame. And some fun aspects, right? So my thought is pull this all together. We recently purchased the PNC Bank lot that's next to the existing town hall. And I know we have expressed interest from the person who owns the Red Cross building to sell that parcel to us as well. So wouldn't it be amazing if we purchased that and then we would own a whole lot of contiguous land and we could build an incredible town hall, public safety, and community center all in one. I see that having an agriculture roof where we're growing produce that ends up going to the kitchen for the senior center. I see us having a beautiful public plaza, a place to gather where we can give speeches. I know you're thrilled about that, but all of you, who want to celebrate milestones like the recent election, instead of that happening in traffic on Bloomfield Avenue, we can have a big, beautiful plaza where that can take place. So I just want to have us dream big on this stuff. Let's dream big on having a skate park in Montclair. On the left side here, you'll see what is going to happen already. Thanks again to my colleagues on the council, Deputy Mayor Herlock, Councilwoman Schlager, Mayor Spiller, and others. We've approved a $10,000 grant to work with U.S. Olympian Alexis Sablon, who's going to be designing the sculptures that you see on your left that will go in our temporary skate park. And the hope is that those sculptures will get integrated into a future permanent skate park. And on the right side is just an iteration disregard the palm trees, of what a possible skate park could look like in Montclair in the Rand Park area. Imagine how amazing that can be. And neighbors that immediately abut the current temporary skate park on the east side, we hear you. I know you hear us in terms of the noise. I would want us to have a noise barrier as well. I see it having a beautiful public/graffiti art wall that goes along, and arborvitaes on the other side that are 20 feet tall that gives buffering for sound so that we're not disturbing your right to enjoy your privacy, your peace and quiet on your property. Let's dream big about the Essex Hudson Greenway. I want to bring that to Montclair. And by the way, universally, the mayor, the rest of my colleagues on the council, in particular, County Commissioner Brendan Gill, and I have to give a big shout out to Deb Kagan of the New Jersey Bike Walk Coalition and her team for all the work trying to bring this to life. For those of you who don't know, it's the old abandoned Lackawanna rail line that runs from Montclair to Jersey City. All of that land is available contiguously for us to take, for the counties to take possession of, and for us to then turn that space essentially into what you see in these photos here. So imagine the ability to bike from Montclair to Jersey City or vice versa, or walk or exercise or jog. Imagine what that can do if all the people along that greenway and from Jersey City and even coming from Manhattan had an easy way, in addition to the trains, in addition to your cars, to get to Montclair, and then to bring it back to that connection I mentioned earlier with having a bike lane that goes right into our central business district. Imagine, imagine, imagine. That's what dreaming big is about. And if you're interested in this particular project, the Essex Hudson Greenway, note on the 31st of March, Wednesday at 7 o'clock, there will be an information session. And again, you can go back to revisit this slide in this presentation, and I'll also send it out over email so you can register and participate. Let's dream big for our environment. Let's do composting in Montclair. We know there are private companies that do it. I'd love to see us do a pilot program in Montclair. And in fact, I'm selfishly, will tell you that my fiance is working on it with our Montclair Environmental Commission and some friends. I want to shout out Leanne Carlson, who I know has been big on this and helping. I want to see us, and I know many of my colleagues agree, pilot a composting program. Let's continue the discussion around reducing plastic use in town beyond just plastic bags. How can we get rid of stirrers and cutlery and foam containers and plastic straws, right? Reduce, recycle, reuse, reimagine, right? Let's think about that. And electric vehicle charging stations, that's going to be another big part of the coming infrastructure bill from the federal government, is going to be to build out an electric charging vehicle infrastructure network across the country. So what does that look like in Montclair? Maybe it's part of that future municipal complex, we'll see. And I'm excited to talk about LGBTQIA, I said that without getting tongue-tied, equality in Montclair. As many of you know, I'm the first openly gay person to be elected to office here in Montclair. And I want to talk quickly about some of the things that I think we have the opportunity to do. So the Human Rights Campaign, which is the largest LGBTQ organization in the United States, scores municipalities every single year. And we've gone up every year. 2017, we started at 58, 2018 in the 60s. Last year, we scored a 78. So I like to see us get to 100. This isn't about points for me. This is about doing the right thing. And I have to tell you, from the mayor to Councilor Russo to Councilwoman Price Abrams, most of my colleagues who I've talked to, there's not an issue with any of these things. So I see us moving forward on most of this, and in particular, our township employees as well. We've got a wonderful affirmative action officer, Bruce Morgan, our township manager, Tim Stafford, our township attorney, Ira Karasik. Everyone has asked the question simply, how can we help and how can we get this done? So what I'd like to see us do in Montclair, what my colleagues have expressed their agreement and willingness to do, require non-discrimination in township contracts with third parties to specifically protect people based on gender identity and expression, require all single-user, sex-segregated facilities within the township, like bathrooms and changing rooms, to be all gender. This does not mean construction or deconstruction. This literally means if there's a single occupancy restroom in town, where it's a door and you go in and there's a toilet, that be labeled or signed that it's an all gender restroom. So this is at most for our businesses changing of a sign. So it's something that I would like us to be thinking about. And I know that some of my colleagues are supportive, and we're going to continue that conversation. Update the township equal employment opportunity and affirmative action policies to enumerate protections, again, on the basis of gender identity and expression. Ask the town to appoint an LGBTQ community liaison within the township manager's office, and then for them to, as well, to deploy inclusivity training to the township workforce. And then later, because this is going to take some time and there is an expense to this, I want to be clear on that, expand health benefits to transgender township employees or potential future transgender township employees. And I'm really, really excited to share, this is a personal passion, that in April, I, as a private person, and many leaders throughout Montclair, national organization leaders, local leaders, people from faith-based organizations, people from Parks and Recreation, people from the transgender community, all coming together. We've got a robust advisory board that's coming together to launch what we're calling Out Montclair in April. This is going to be a group focused on building community, hosting educational and social events for the LGBTQ community in Montclair. So get used to saying Montclair Pride, because that's what we have on our mind, bringing finally a Montclair Pride Festival to Montclair. We're hoping for 2022. So be on the lookout for more news about this. And lastly, just save the date in terms of our next parks cleanup weekend. Montclair Township Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee has indicated we're going to go forward with April 24th and 25th as a parks cleanup weekend. Last year we had, it was actually November, we had 250 people across all of our township parks in Montclair. It was beautiful. Here's a group of us at Canterbury Park last year, Dr. Baskerville. I know Mr. William Scott is in the photo here. Just a beautiful, beautiful experience to see so many people out and about. And this also happened to be the day that the election was called for Joe Biden, which was a particularly sweet moment as well. So with that, I'm going to take a sip of water, and then we're going to start to look at your questions. So again, I received many questions in advance, which I've written down. I will read the name of the person who asked the question and my answer. And then my friend Robin Wallace is here with me to help moderate. I know there's questions coming in through the Q&A feature of the chat. So with that, one sec. Okay. So Frank Millsbaugh asked about internet connectivity for seniors. So Frank, I think, I hope that you got that in terms of my presentation. So the money that's earmarked for Montclair through the American Rescue Plan is, some of it is supposed to be used for the expansion of internet connectivity. We know that the library has been lending out hotspots to people as well, the Montclair Public Library. And I also know that Senators Ruiz and Scutari have also introduced a bill that will hopefully come with financial and technical support just in terms of expanding broadband access. So Frank, thank you for the question, and thank you for the work that you do on the Senior Citizens Advisory Committee in town. Robin, do you want to give me a question from the chat?
Yes, I will. I know this particular issue is very close to you, Peter, and you have several questions about excessive leaf blower use, even though the ordinance has been passed, as well as how that will impact town employees.
Yeah, thank you. And I know this is something that's people are very passionate about, right? Politics is the art of the possible. And what I will tell you, and I know my colleague, Councilor Russo, is on this, who helped lead the charge on this. We got the best thing done that we could get done in time to affect this year. What was on our mind with kids going back to school virtually, right? Making the hour later per day, eliminating the beginning of March, eliminating half of May and all of June, we felt were really, really important to get that done. So it really was about what was possible. But we hear you, I hear you in terms of the consistency with township employees. We need to upgrade our equipment in Montclair. And I believe, and I feel pretty strongly that we need to also abide by the leaf blower ordinance ourselves as a township. And that's something that we've expressed to our township manager. And we will continue to have that conversation and look for ways to fund the upgrading of the equipment for our employees and ensuring that we're following the regulations. Now, what I will say is on an emergency use basis, of course, the township reserves a right and will suspend the ordinance when there's storm and storm cleanup and storm debris. And we also have to understand that a lot of the time, most of the use for township employees is happening in a park. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a good thing, but it's at least not next door to your house or right outside your windows, at least a little bit of a buffer zone. So we'll get there, I promise. We're not going to let that one go. Jeff Dimmerman asked, since Katie York left, or just asked about Katie York's departure, who was the head of senior services for the town. Jeff also asked about a senior center, and then just also asked about general senior support services in Montclair. So what I'll say, Jeff, is, and Katie has made this public, so Katie got a wonderful job at the AARP, couldn't pass it up, and it's a good thing for us, right? Now she's going to be working on senior issues at the state level with Montclair forever in her heart and the experiences that she learned from Montclair. I think it's a good thing for us when somebody grows up from Montclair into a bigger institution on a bigger level in terms of delivering resources and solutions. That role will be filled. So have no worries, that job is not going to go away. Will we be able to ever fill Katie York's shoes? Probably not. I don't know, but we're certainly going to try. In terms of a senior center, I mentioned that earlier. I see that as part of a bigger municipal complex. There are other options in town. We own the ice rink, for example. Councilor Cummings and I have discussed potentially adding a second floor, for example, to the ice rink for a senior center or community center. So there's lots of options on the table. It is a priority for us. And then general senior services support. We're thinking about seniors all the time, really, and everything we do, from a 2.5% rate on rent control to our vaccines and how we're distributing them in Montclair now, to some of the broadband measures that I talked about earlier, to the senior center again that we discussed, to the programming that we switched over from in-person to virtual, to food delivery services, to transportation conversations that we're having. Seniors are top of mind for me always and forever will be. And that's something that, again, is consistent across the council and the mayor. Robin, do we have another question from the chat?
Yes, we do. Since you are a fresh set of eyes on town spending, is there any area in particular you think would benefit from a full review of what is being spent currently and whether that spending is achieving the goals?
So my first introduction into the full budget is going to be over the month of April. That's where I get to, and really all of you, department heads will be presenting the budget to us, the council, over a series of council meetings. And then I have a dedicated briefing for several hours where I'll be going deep into the budget. So it's going to be my first time going through it this cycle. What I will say is that we have a lot of world-class and brilliant people who work on this. I spent a lot of time with our CFO. We have a wonderful consultant, Bob Beneke, our township council financial committee made up of Councilor Cummings, Deputy Mayor Herlock, and Mayor Spiller. I really do trust them and their judgment. I think they're doing a great job. And again, I think we have a world-class CFO. And so for me, the trust is there. But the question is going to be, are the priorities that I have, because I formed that point of view based on the conversations with all of you, and are the priorities of the community reflected in those spending decisions going forward? And for me, some of this is the Titanic, right? And being careful. You can't change direction too quickly without unintended consequences. So I just want for us to be careful. I do think we can certainly make some changes and should. Whether or not those happen this first year that I'm in office and that we have a new council, I'm not sure, but know that it's dialogue that many of us are starting. And I'm sure this will come up in the context of police reform. Something that Councilwoman Price Abrams and Councilor Russo and I have been talking about is, thinking differently about human services in town and what that service model looks like. So that's one area. Quality of life, right? I think a lot about our parklets and our parks and the investments we're making. all the things I talked about earlier in terms of the dreaming big, that we can start to put some seed money towards. I'm going to say something that may be unpopular. We pay back $2 million a year in debt. I would be supportive of suspending those debt repayments for 2 years while the federal government, the state government, and everybody else is in this rescue America mode with stimulus dollars flowing. Why don't we join? Let's get federal money, let's get state money, let's get county money, let's take our own money and make the big investments that we need to make, generational investments in Montclair. I'm going to read another question I got from a constituent. Sarah Olson asked, how can we help promote business development given closures in town? And what's the impact of those closures on the tax base? So Sarah, what I'll say is really, truthfully, pre-pandemic and now, the net vacancy rate hasn't really changed. So there are significant opportunities just in terms of commercial space downtown that have yet to get tenants. So Seymour Street, for example, is going to have vacancy. Obviously, the old Chase building. So there are a few places that are big square footages that we don't have customers for yet or tenants for yet. But overall, every time a business closes, another one opens. We've seen so many business openings through this pandemic. Montclair has just proven to be so resilient, both in terms of the housing market and our small business community. So I'm not too concerned. I haven't seen the numbers yet in terms of the impact on the tax base. I know the tax appeals process is well underway, and we'll have to see what that looks like. But the good news is, again, with $3.8 million, part of which is intended to help us offset revenue losses this year, I'm hopeful that we can keep ourselves whole and that there's no municipal tax increase for the 4th year in a row. Thank you. Robin.
Yes. Has the township considered providing assistance to landlords of multifamily properties where the tenants are unlawfully occupying their properties, meaning they are there without a lease because of the moratorium?
So I don't really see, to be honest, I don't see that as that's not a local issue. This is strictly and really governed by state law and through the courts. So what I would encourage, if anyone is dealing with illegal occupancy, or when we get to the point where the eviction moratorium is lifted and somebody is unlawfully in a unit, that you follow the protocols that the state dictates and that the courts outline for eviction proceedings. Montclair, as a township, does not handle evictions. We do not deal with evictions. We do informally try to mediate disputes between landlords and tenants through our Housing Commission and the Landlord-Tenant Subcommittee of the Housing Commission. But again, eviction is really handled through the state and particularly through the court system. And I can't urge folks enough to make sure you're following the law. Thank you. And then I have a question from Robin Woods, who asked about revitalizing specifically the 200 to 300 section of Bloomfield Avenue. She also asked about indoor dining and if we will deviate from the state in terms of their guidance and the safety of those igloos or whatever you call the enclosures that people sit in for dining. So first, Robin, in terms of revitalizing the 200 to 300 section, I know what section you're talking about in terms of along Bloomfield Avenue. And look, you can add the block to the east and the block to the west as well. There is a couple things that give me hope here. First of all, we've got a rock star 4th Ward council member who's thinking about this regularly, David Cummings. We also have the Montclair Business Improvement District working on a strategic plan, a multi-year strategic plan. Part of it, there's been so much great intake from the community talking about their wishes, their hopes for the whole business improvement district in general, but specifically a lot of things have come up for that area. And I do think the development of Lackawanna Plaza is going to help extend the center of gravity, right? Like the center of gravity in Montclair, I think people would agree, is the sort of Church Street, Bloomfield area, South Park crossing, right? With the Seymour Street development, with the Lackawanna development, I think you're going to see that center of gravity pulled more east along Bloomfield Avenue. More people, more shoppers, just more traffic overall, foot traffic, hopefully not much more car traffic, which I think is going to help those businesses. We've also talked about just having consistency in terms of lighting and trees and tree beds and street pole banners. And so there's a lot of interesting things I think we can do to help create and sustain a cohesive central business district. And then indoor dining capacity, that has to be dictated by our health official in Montclair, and my colleagues and I on the council can offer an opinion, but that is to me a health official matter. I don't see any reason for us to deviate from the state unless we had an acute problem that was specific to Montclair. Otherwise, we're pretty much sticking to the same trends as the county and the state. So thank you, Robin. And then Robin Wallace, what do we have in the chat?
Yes. John Farb says that he appreciates your willingness to engage with Montclair residents on the issue of schools reopening. Recently, you said that you were against returning to 5 days of in-person learning this school year, and that the district should wait until next year to return to 5 days of in-person learning. What data and science are you basing that opinion upon?
Sure. So it's not an opinion based on data and science, it's an opinion based on logistics. So first I want to say, as a council member, I have this much power over the school system, zero. The only thing that I get to do is vote on issuing bonds. I'm not on the Board of School Estimates like my colleagues, which actually approves the budget for the district. Maybe one day in these 4 years I will be, we'll see. So look, for me, it's a logistics issue, right? It's the middle of March. We've got 3 months or less of the school year. We're not even talking about opening elementary schools until into April, and intermediate middle schools and the high school thereafter. So for me, it's a logistics issue. The district and all the employees of the district have worked tirelessly to get the classrooms to the standards that they are now, which is based on guidance from the CDC in terms of social distancing, capacities in the rooms, dividers, air purifiers, all of the safety protocol. They've done a tremendous amount of work getting the classrooms ready to open in a hybrid capacity. And so for me, we can't throw that plan out now and start from scratch. We won't get the schools open this year if we do that. So for me, it is really about setting the marker now. We should open full-time 5 days a week for September. I've always believed that vaccines don't need to be a precursor to opening schools. Plenty of school districts around the country and in our state are open and have opened without teachers being vaccinated and have done so safely. Of course, you can cherry pick cases or instances where it hasn't gone well, but by and large, data suggests that it is safe to do so. And what I'd like to see us ensure is that we're open hybrid, as the school district has said, beginning with the elementary schools in early April. And by September, we're opening for the full 21-22 school year, 5 days a week. I don't see any reason, unless something dramatically changes in terms of these COVID variants or the effectiveness of vaccines, that we can't stay on that trajectory. Thank you for the question. And I have a question from Drew Edel, who asked about how do we balance the Safe Streets plan with parking in Montclair? So look, I think, I understand the question, right? There's been this fear that putting in bicycle lanes means we're going to take away parking. And I have to be honest, I don't see that happening much, maybe in some cases. So I'll give you an example. What I proposed earlier in my presentation was a Glen Ridge Avenue bike lane that would connect Bay Street train station to Bloomfield Avenue. In that scenario, potentially you could see eliminating parking on one side of the street, but we're also building a new parking deck right there. The Midtown parking deck is under construction with hundreds of spots. So for me, that potentially is a decent trade-off. But there are also designs out there where you can have still parking in front of the stores, a lane of traffic, and a bike lane, and it can all fit. So I just hope our experts can take a look at it and we can just maximize the space to the best ability possible. I am not for eliminating in front of store parking in our dense commercial districts. I know that's a concern that people have. I don't see why we would have to do that. And in this case of the bike lane that I proposed, it would terminate at the intersection of Glen Ridge and Bloomfield. And the expectation would be people would park their bikes, lock them up, get up, and then walk around the rest of the central business district. So I don't see lanes going through business districts in a way that has to eliminate parking in front of stores. However, I do want us to be rethinking Church Street and South Park Street, just in terms of trying to have, at minimum, weekend pedestrian plaza and even a night and weekend pedestrian plaza set up there, which would eliminate some more parking in those areas. But again, there's new parking decks at Seymour Street, the new parking deck here. We already obviously have the Crescent deck, parking at Valley and Bloom. There's a lot of parking under construction and having recently opened in town. And so I think we have to think differently about our open space in general to ensure that we're protecting bicycle and pedestrian safety. Thanks for the question. Robin, what do we got in the chat?
We have lots of questions in the chat.
Okay.
So I hope we can really get through all of these great questions. So we have a few questions regarding the Essex Hudson Greenway. One asks if federal dollars that are being allocated for infrastructure can be used toward that. And another question asks if given the amount of construction and traffic along Bloomfield Avenue, would it be better for the town to focus on the Essex Hudson Greenway as our bike lane?
Okay, so in terms of the first one there, I believe, yes, there will be federal grant dollars, state grant dollars, private, nonprofit. I think it's a smorgasbord of all the above. Wherever we can get funding for the Essex Hudson Greenway, we should get it. And I have a lot of confidence in Deb Kagan and many of my colleagues in government who came before me, who have been passionate about this issue, us all collaborating and working together to unlock all the funding solutions that we can possibly have. Look, Bloomfield Avenue, Grove Street, these are all county roads. They're not township roads. We really can't control how they are designed. What I will say is there is a plan for Bloomfield Avenue to get redone in 2022 throughout Montclair. It's changing over most of our intersections, most of our signals and traffic lights, introducing a new crosswalk from the Wellmont Theater crossing Bloomfield Avenue. So unfortunately, it might be too late to try and introduce a bike lane on Bloomfield Avenue, but I'd like to think about if there's a way to enhance crossing safety and use, like I mentioned earlier, Glen Ridge Avenue and other secondary roads. So to me, if you're trying to come from, let's just say you're riding your bike all the way from Newark or wherever, Bloomfield, along Bloomfield Avenue, I'd rather see you go over to this greenway and ride your bike safely. And by the way, it's a much prettier view. Come into Montclair, come up to Glen Ridge Avenue bike path, park your bike, and then enjoy downtown. That would be my preference there. Thank you. Robin.
This question is from Greener Montclair. And actually, we have a few questions on this issue concerning garbage accumulating in front of businesses in town. So I'll read Greener Montclair's question. My question is garbage. There seems to be a whole lot of it lately. Will the town of Montclair be providing a location for businesses to dispose of all their garbage? This has been an ongoing situation with larger restaurants not being able to dispose their garbage properly. Would the town of Montclair consider putting a dumpster in the mid-lot parking deck? And then there are a few other questions regarding lack of trash collection in front of businesses.
Yeah, so we're just in an acute situation right now that's temporary, that's difficult, right? With the Midtown deck under construction and that lot closed, especially along Bloomfield Avenue, all those dumpsters were obviously behind, not visible on Bloomfield Avenue. And now, unfortunately, for the next year, or should be less than a year at this point, it is closed. So it is unfortunately something that we're going to have to just deal with in terms of Bloomfield Avenue for the next 10, 11 months or so, however much longer the construction timeline is. What I will say is I've had consistent and regular conversations with property owners, with the Montclair Center bid, with some of my colleagues and the township government about building enclosures on Bloomfield Avenue for trash bags and dumpsters so that it's not an eyesore, but also to help a little bit with the smell and just to beautify it a little bit. So that's a conversation that we've been having in terms of trying to build enclosures there. Most trash from local businesses in the business district, though, is carted away by private companies. It's private contracts between businesses and those companies. It's not a function of the township to pick up most of the trash from those businesses downtown. And the other thing I'll note, obviously, is it was a big challenge these last couple of weeks. We had a lot of Department of Community Services employees get sick with COVID-19 and others who had to quarantine as a result of the exposure. So our whole cycle of pickup was really thrown off. A wrench was thrown into the logistics. Luckily, most are back working. We've been able to resume our regular schedule. It's going to take a little bit of time for us to get that capacity back up to 100%. So I'm just going to ask everybody to continue to be patient. And if you're able to, do what I do what my partner does, and what my neighbors have written me and told me they're doing. And I noticed it, right? There's a lot of trash on the street. It sucks right now. Go out and pick it up if you can. We all have to pitch in and help. The town is doing the best they can with the resources we have in a pandemic when everything has been so strange for a year now, that really all of us should pitch in as much as we can. And I understand we pay a lot of money in taxes. I totally get that. Just please bear with us as we round out this pandemic. Thank you. And then I'm going to answer another question that we got from Brenda Williams, asked some related to this other question. What's the frequency of street cleaning in town for business districts and residential areas? So quick answer for you. I love when it's quick answers. Every street in Montclair gets cleaned 4 times a year. This is with a street sweeper coming through, residential. And then the business districts are actually cleaned once a week. So there's your answer on that. So it's fairly frequent. Thanks for that question. And then I'll answer one more quick one from Kendra Johnson, asked about snack bars at the pools and food trucks at the pools. So right now by law, unfortunately, food trucks would not be permitted by the pools. And the reason is because the pools are in residential areas and we do not permit food trucks in residential areas. We also do not permit food trucks within 200 feet of schools. And a couple of our pools are right next to schools as well. So it's a problem. And if that's something that the community is interested in, that's something that you should definitely write your council members about. And we can have a conversation to see if we want to edit that law or try to change that law at all to make it possible for food trucks to be near our parks or our pools. And in terms of snack bars at the pools, I'm sure that's just a capacity issue. It's a conversation that I'm happy to have with our township employees who run the pools, and my colleagues and I. We'll start the conversation with my colleagues and then let that cascade through and just see if there's interest in trying to explore that. I've heard it and from a number of people over the years. I could tell you just from going to Essex Pool myself, I remember being a kid going to the pools on Long Island. I liked going and buying a hot dog or a hot pretzel or candy or soda at the little stand at the pool. It made the day a more enjoyable experience. So that's something I would absolutely love to see in Montclair. Robin, what else do we have in the chat?
Latasha Foster asks, well, she says that she loved the closed Church Street stroll and dine. Will that continue into this summer? And how is it perceived by the business owners on that corridor?
Oh, thank you. I love that question. So by the majority of the businesses are received well, right? But we also, there are always lessons learned. That's why I really love this concept of testing and learning, right? Like, for example, we didn't anticipate that businesses, would react negatively to it because of the way it impacted food delivery services from being able to pick up orders at their stores or at their restaurants. So that was a big learning for us. And some stores also just fervently opposed it because of their type of clientele who they would like to see be able to park directly in front of their stores on Church Street. So, we do continue to listen to all the businesses. I would say the majority of the businesses on Church Street, however, were in favor of the Church Street closure, saw increased revenues as a result of the Church Street closure. So we'd have to balance out all those perspectives. We have a need for residential egress. There's a driveway on that street that we have to be mindful of. We always will have to be mindful of security and safety services, and we'll always have to be mindful of deliveries as well. So I'd like to see us have some sort of a hybrid where Church Street is closed nights and weekends. Maybe it starts with like Thursday, Friday night, and then all weekend long. And or maybe it's a redesign of that street that has a travel lane for emergency vehicles and for deliveries, but the sidewalks are extended and dining tables and lighting and trees and all that stuff can be extended further to make it more of a plaza. I think that's the direction Montclair should head in. I really believe that strongly. Thank you. Robin, what
Yes,
else we
I will
got?
keep going, yes. Are there any updates regarding speed bumps on Greenwood Avenue?
Oh, thank you. Do we know who asked that question? It's okay if we don't.
We don't have a full name.
Okay. I've been talking to a lot of people on Greenwood Avenue since the shooting there last year. Look, I have to be honest, I must get an email a week about wanting a stop sign or wanting a traffic light or wanting speed bumps. The conditions right now, first of all, the Department of Transportation requires that a study be done. We cannot put a stop sign in or speed bumps in until a study is done. And the criteria for those studies are that there are normal traffic patterns. And right now, without people commuting to work, without people driving their kids to school, without school buses, and all those things that are part of the normal traffic pattern, it's really hard to get an accurate assessment of the traffic patterns on particular streets in order to be able to make that recommendation. However, I have noticed that Greenwood Avenue, I guess because of its proximity to the central business district and some of the popular restaurants and how it sits on the sort of outskirts of the business district with all the parking challenges there right now, how it is an acute problem. So all I will say is that, I will continue to have a dialogue with Councilor Cummings and Councilor Price Abrams. If you're on the east side of Greenwood Avenue, you're in Councilor Cummings' district. And if you're on the west side of Greenwood Avenue, you're in Councilor Price Abrams' district. So the three of us and the mayor and Councilor Russo, who's at large, can have that conversation and see if we can try and make something happen sooner than later for Greenwood. But note that we really do need for traffic patterns to return to normal before we can be putting in stop signs or speed bumps or traffic lights anywhere in town. Thanks for the question. And I'll do one more from you, Robin. I know we got a bunch in the chat.
I do have a bunch. Leslie Kunkin writes that as you train a much needed eye on senior and quality of life issues, that the large and vibrant disability community in Montclair be included in the consideration. She writes that she loves many of your ideas for designing new and inclusive spaces, and asks that you please encourage consideration of universal design and methods of making the town and all it offers accessible to people of all abilities.
So thank you for that question. I absolutely love that and appreciate it. So that is something that was certainly in mind in terms of safe streets. And as we're thinking about pedestrian safety, ADA accessibility was a big part of that. One of the big opportunities, I think, when we are staring down what I really believe is the need for generational investment in infrastructure and our buildings in Montclair, is that so many of our buildings, I think, will need to be renovated over the coming years or rebuilt. And within that, I would absolutely love to see accessibility be prominent. There's no reason why it shouldn't. What was the challenge after the ADA was passed in the 90s was the retrofitting of older buildings. That was what was particularly cumbersome and expensive, obviously, and where all the political pushback came from. But in new construction, if you're just starting out from the place of just designing it into the plans, it's no different in expense. Maybe some of the aspects are, but generally the width of doors, ramps, elevators, all that stuff. If you're building it into the plan from scratch, it's usually a negligible impact on the overall cost of a project. And we should have that. And you should also know that this comes up in a lot of other contexts. For example, the sidewalk dining, we made it a requirement that if we were to do sidewalk cafe dining and you pushed people into the street and you had concrete barriers that did what we call a pedlet, that you would need accessibility on either end of that. Just trying to make sure that we're thinking about that. And if you have any other ideas or thoughts for what we can do differently in town, if there's specific buildings that you notice, specific businesses that we can talk to, happy to have you reach out to me to have that conversation, because it's something that's close to my heart. So thank you for asking that. I'm going to answer a question from another constituent who wrote in advance. Christine Singer asked about the Church Street traffic circle, what lessons were learned and what's the timing of that. I feel you. My gosh, I ride my bike all over Montclair all the time. And if I ride my bike through there, I get hit with gravel. So I hear you. It's dangerous. The good news is the construction resumes on April 5th. So 2 weeks, the construction will resume, so long as we don't have some major snow or ice event. And that includes the paving of that area. So I'm excited about that. In terms of lessons learned, look, the delays really had to do with some of the contractors and third-party contractors, just in terms of the costs of materials. So certain materials that were presented in the design essentially ended up, being much more of a cost than they were when they were presented. It's the same as somebody going through a renovation of your house. You have a budget, you end up spending double your budget, or you have a budget and you're working with contractors and things end up to be more expensive, or the thing that you were planning or the material you were planning to use isn't available, so you have to go with an alternative. So the lesson for me, and again, this is from a little bit of a distance perspective, I'm not involved obviously in the day-to-day public works projects of the town, but what I've observed, what I'd like to see is that when we are getting a plan or proposal, that we're asking more questions and that we are asking and even possibly writing into the contract what the contingencies are should we run into a situation where something is priced much higher than anticipated or not available. So thank you, Christine. Robin, I'll go with another one of the questions from the chat.
Yes. Bill Barrett writes that given the explosive increase in COVID cases since the beginning of February, is anyone responsible for enforcing the current capacity limits in the town's restaurants? He expresses concerns that some of the restaurants are operating at full or 50% capacity when the limit is 35%.
So there's a couple options for recourse here. One is, I don't know the website off the top of my head. Maybe one of my, maybe Robin can potentially find it just for an intake form, and we'll put it in the chat. I know there's a complaint form where you can file. I believe it's with the county. If not, it's with the state of New Jersey, where you can report a restaurant for being in violation of the capacity issues there. We do, the law enforcement in general will work off of tips. They also do, honestly, just walk around and try and observe, but really tipping off law enforcement is the best way to make sure we're addressing any violations there. I'm just going to be frank. I know we're following the state guidelines, and those state guidelines now, dictate 50% capacity. For me, that's always been a little vague, because I've always wondered if it means 50% of the certificate of occupancy number, right? That red and white sign that's usually on the wall somewhere in the back of a restaurant that tells you how many people you can have in your facility at any given time from a fire safety perspective, versus what your traditional seating capacity was, right? So, we know that places are, being clever and getting clever with the way they arrange tables, and they'll say they removed X number of tables and chairs. And, for me, it's two things. It's if you walk into a place, and I'm going to be honest, I've done this. I've walked into a place and I've felt uncomfortable, and I've turned around and I've walked right out. And I've also filed complaints online for restaurants where I have felt that they weren't following the rules or I was uncomfortable. So first and foremost, listen to your gut. If you walk into an establishment and you observe something, it doesn't feel right, it looks like it's too crowded, it probably is. I would recommend going somewhere else. And I'd recommend that you make sure to report that. And look, I think, for me, I'm very concerned about what's happening in terms of the variants. I'm very concerned about the month of April and the next 2 weeks and the month of April. For me, it is, if we don't do the right thing these next 6 weeks, we are going to set ourselves back. I really believe President Biden when he said we can have a somewhat normal 4th of July weekend. But I also really believe if we let things go, if we get lazy with our behaviors, then we are going to see a bigger spike than we're already starting to see. We see it in Europe. We know that certain variants spread much more easily. Certain variants are much more deadly. And so don't be the person that gets COVID in the 11th hour. Let's not be the town that has a COVID spike in the 11th hour. Like, the goalpost is in reach. We can see it. Let's just get there. Keep wearing your masks. Keep washing your hands. Do not have indoor parties or gatherings. You don't take the chance. You think, oh, it's fine. There's just a couple of us. Like, it's fine if we don't have our masks on. Be smart about it. Keep your HVAC running when you're indoors with other people, windows open. Try to be outdoors. Continue to do takeout as much as possible. Dine outdoors. Everything that Dr. Fauci and others have been saying for the last year. And by the way, make sure your kids are doing that, because youth is, I love you guys, but youth is where the spread is happening mostly, right? And it's not in schools, it's in parties, it's in social spaces. So make sure your kids are wearing masks when they're out and about, when they're with their friends, etc. So thank you. And then I have another question from Bassam Abed and Peter Singer, who asked about county road curbs, who's in charge of those? And I added also just to mention sidewalks and trees. So the county's in charge of the county roads, right? So we have repaved most of our roads now in Montclair and recurbed many as well in terms of the granite blocks. That is something that the previous mayor and council had led over their 2 terms, significant investment, somewhere around $7 million a year in repaving and recurbing most of our township streets. And they look beautiful and they did an incredible job, and kudos. I don't know what the county's plans are to follow the same. I don't anticipate the county doing the same granite block curbing. However, repaving certainly does happen from time to time. So if there's a particular road that you have in mind that you think needs it, I would just encourage you to reach out to me. Reminder that residents are responsible for the sidewalks in front of your house. You have to make sure that they're kept in good condition and that they're safe. To the woman who asked the question about accessibility, think about people in wheelchairs. Think about seniors walking, with support. Think about, just from a safety perspective, make sure your sidewalks are safe and up to code. That is your responsibility as a homeowner. And if you want, work with your neighbors and reach out to a company collectively, and maybe you can get a bulk discount or get some sort of a, negotiated group rate to do a bunch of houses all at once if neighbors on your block want to come together and do that. And while I'm on the topic of trees and curbs and things like that too, remember that it is also your responsibility to take care of the trees. The township or the county plants the trees, and then it's really up to us as residents to water and to maintain the trees in front of our home. So thank you, Bassam and Peter, for those questions. And then Robin, do we have another question in the chat?
Yes, we do. Related to that topic, Rafael Rodriguez asks, what can be done about the dangerous state of some of the sidewalks in Montclair?
So I think, Rafael, I answered that. So what I will say is this. Look, it is challenging. I hate that neighbor has to tell on neighbor, neighbor has to report on neighbor, but there is a way to do it where it's, it's confidential, right? So if you see a house or a sidewalk that's particularly egregious and it's a township sidewalk, report it to code enforcement. Go to montclairnjusa.org, look up code enforcement. There's an email and a phone number where you can report that sidewalk, and code enforcement will send someone out, have a look at it. They'll have a conversation with the homeowner or the property owner in terms of rectifying that. But again, sidewalks are the responsibility of homeowners in town. Thanks for the question. And then I'll answer another one from another constituent who wrote me, and then we'll go to Robin again for other questions. So, and I know this is, so Heather Mills asked, and I'm pausing a moment here because I sort of already answered this one in terms of the 5-day school week. I answered that a little earlier, probably about 15 minutes ago, in terms of how I feel about that. So you can go back and look at that. Next steps in Lackawanna Plaza. I'm really excited about what's possible at Lackawanna Plaza. I've had a lot of conversations, over the last few months with the new owner, David Plasek. We've talked about everything from what I'm concerned about, circulation, just in terms of traffic moving around. I live a block and a half from Lackawanna Plaza. So what happens to vehicle circulation on the streets as a result of that development directly impacts me. So I want everybody in the area to know that I hear you. I feel you on that. When a grocery store is built at Lackawanna Plaza, and that will happen, that will be the grocery store that I walk out of my house and go to do my grocery shopping. So put me on the list of people in the 4th Ward who are anxious to have a grocery store in the 4th Ward. It's been years. It will be a couple more years. And it's an awful thing that it's taken this long, but I do really believe in Dave Plasek's capacity to make this happen, and I'm excited. We've also talked about density. I know he's going to reveal and kind of talk with the community more about his plans there. I really do understand, the perspective in terms of what he's trying to do. If I could wave a wand, I would build more office space in an office building at Lackawanna Plaza, because I think Montclair should be diversifying its tax base a little bit like Morristown and Summit do, in terms of having more businesses headquartered in the township. And I'd love to have the space to do that. But you cannot get financing right now to build an office building in this climate in a pandemic. It's just, banks aren't lending for that cause. It's very hard to make a business case in a pandemic right now for that. And so unfortunately, because of the pandemic affecting the demand, I just don't see that as a viable option. However, there will be some office space. There will certainly be commercial, restaurant, retail. And what I'm really excited about, what he's talked about, are three things: historic preservation. So really nerding out on the history of Lackawanna train station. Our town was built up around what used to be an old coal line that ran to Lackawanna, and so many of the executives for those companies built the beautiful homes that many of you live in today around town. So there's so much incredible history at Lackawanna Plaza. So I'm really excited about Mr. Plasek, especially with his ties to Montclair, being a resident, his passion about making sure the story of the history is tied into the design there. I'm excited about open space and the use of open space, and making sure Lackawanna Plaza is not somewhere you have to go to buy something. It's somewhere you can just go to hang out and be as well. I'm excited about the public art potential, possible public restrooms. I've told him I'd like to see water bottle refill stations there. Keep in mind, if we get that bike lane on Glen Ridge Avenue, that'll be part of that. I just see so much incredible potential for that site. So I'm really excited. But again, as a neighbor, I am concerned about circulation of traffic. I am concerned about overall volume and density. And that has to be an ongoing conversation with the county, who owns Grove Street and Bloomfield Avenue, the township, and residents from all around, particularly the Fourth Ward. So thank you for that question, Heather. What do we got, Robin?
Okay. Due to the recent Facebook chatter about the graffiti on the top deck of the Park Street Garage, would you be interested in exploring a town-sponsored graffiti tagging event open to local artists and youth for that deck?
I'd have to look at the deck. So I love street art. I love graffiti art. I love street art when it's organized, right? When it's controlled. And I think that's the context that you're asking the question in. So I appreciate that. I obviously do not support illegal tagging or graffiti of public property. It's not okay. It's illegal. And we need to make sure we stand against that. But sometimes these things do, have a way of sort of expressing the desires of the community. And so let's have a conversation about that. I'd like to see the specific wall we're talking about. It's definitely a conversation I would want to bring Councilwoman Price Abrams, who represents that area of Montclair, Mayor Spiller, who used to represent that area of Montclair and obviously now represents the whole town, for us to have a conversation. And just in general, though, I would love to identify spaces around town where we can have more sanctioned public art of that type and other types. I think there's a lot of passion for that. And I'm really, really excited. I'm sure many of you saw the Point of Light art installation that's going to be coming to Crane Park. That's something that I was able to work with the artists, the bid, and my colleagues on the council to bring to fruition. We hope that will launch in late March. It's just a wonderful, I think, opportunity to demonstrate what an interactive public art project can look like in Montclair, and can hopefully be a model for how we do things in the future. So I'm just excited about all that potential. I really believe, I take pictures of the art, by the way, all over Montclair, all the murals from, underneath the underpass by the high school with the kids with their hands up with the anti-shooting mural, to the one by Dolly Moo, to the one by Quick Check, all these wonderful murals that I see all over town. The one, right actually facing the Crescent deck on the backside of the stores on Church Street. Beautiful, beautiful public art. I want to see more of it for sure. Thanks for the question. And you know what? Yeah, I'll do another one so a bunch of people asked us. So we have Jacqueline Resnick, Eric D'Amato, elected versus appointed school board. I think I've made enough news tonight. So I will say, honestly, I'm not here to make news. on this issue. What I will say is I'm thinking very carefully about it. I know that there is I think it's votemontclair.org or something like that. I know they have started a petition. I know the town has approved that petition to actually put the question on the ballot. I anticipate this being a very lively debate. I know the League of Women Voters has put out their thoughts in it. I know my former, who I ran against, but has now sits on our planning board and is now my dear friend, Carmel Lockman, has wrote on this issue. I've seen another gentleman wrote in Montclair Local an op-ed on this issue. So there's a lot of conversation going on. And I am really, really, really interested in just trying to understand the issue more. I mean, certainly I understand it from a layman's perspective, but I just want to get educated before I talk about my point of view. You know, some early thoughts just in terms of elected board, the value in it or the upside to it. You know, there's just accountability that comes with having people elected, right? I feel that. I feel accountable to the people who elected me. I feel like I have to answer to those people, all of you, all the time. You, the voters, if there were an elected board, would approve bond referendums for any capital expenditures. That could be a pro, that could be a con, truly. Anyone can run for a seat, right? Anyone can run for the school board. Is that a good thing? Maybe. But if you are somebody that's that passionate about running and wants to be on the school board, let us know, because I know the mayor is always looking for qualified candidates. So while we're having that discussion, let's definitely, you know, make sure talented people step forward. And some cons about an elected board. I think, you know, you can have candidates or factions that have specific agendas that can take over boards. That could potentially be to the detriment of schools. So I would be concerned, I would want to guard against like a charter school group, for example, taking control of the board. You know, let's just say, I don't think this would happen in Montclair. Let's just say enough people got together who didn't have kids in the schools or who didn't want to fund the schools at the level that we fund them at. You know, they could potentially have the power to gut the budget. So there are just things you have to be careful over. Schools can be held hostage to anti-school, you know, anti-tax majorities, right? So, you know, that's sort of what I was mentioning earlier. A con to appointed boards. Appointed boards are only accountable to the mayor, and not really even, because the mayor appoints them and then they live out their full term. It's not like we have a process for removing school board members in town. They're not accountable to the voters. Voters have less of a voice and control over school policy decisions, over the expenditures of the school district. That's something to think about, right? So let's keep having that conversation. And the lack of accountability, I think, you know, I think that's a really, really, really fundamental issue. And then in terms of the pros of an appointed board, people are appointed based on qualifications. And, you know, I want to compliment the mayor on his appointment of Allison Silverstein, who's been a wonderful addition to our Board of Education. It takes the politics, I think, out of decisions when people are in fixed roles. It's sort of how we talk about the Supreme Court, or how we used to talk about the Supreme Court. Well, you know, when you serve for life and you don't have to run for election, you're not posturing to run for election. You're, I think, doing the job more based on your qualifications and maybe without any biases, and certainly without the politics in it. So this is a tough issue. And there is an element of independence, but I understand the frustration that a lot of people have in Montclair with having so many superintendents over the years, and the, you know, the lack of continuity and leadership and vision. I will say I've had a bunch of conversations with Superintendent Pons, and I'm excited about him. He is a wonderful man, younger than me, which makes me feel really old. And not a single superintendent in the United States of America has experience running a school district in a pandemic. So this is a guy who came to Montclair, took over our school district in the middle of a pandemic. So I am for seeing Dr. Pons be successful. I want to do whatever I can to help Dr. Pons be successful. I think he has the fundamentals and has demonstrated in many ways what it takes to be a good leader. And I think he's only going to grow and get better. And I want to help him in whatever way I can. And I think we should all be thinking about, as a community, how we can be helping him. So I just wanted to make sure to throw that in there. So long conversation to be had. And what I'm thinking about And what I will commit to is hosting a town hall specifically on this issue and bringing stakeholders together to argue the pros and cons of appointed, of elected. Let's bring some experts, let's bring some policy people in, and I will host that roundtable later this year. Thank you.
Are we going at 8:30? Because we have 10 questions.
Yeah, so we have until 8:30, everybody. We have a few more minutes. I am going to answer 2 more questions, and then I will have to, unfortunately, we'll move the conversation to email. So my email is pjacobellis@montclairenjusa.org. But let's just try and answer a few more questions from the chat.
Yes. Okay.
Councilor Jacobellis, you are asked, I would like to know what you are planning to do about reducing the police budget and diverting some of that money into mental health services, and how you would ensure police transparency and accountability.
The police question. Look, I get it. This is complicated, and I'll go a few minutes over 8:30 because I'm not trying to cut this short. I have a lot of thoughts on this. First, I have colleagues on the council who represent the Public Safety Committee who have been studying this carefully and are in the process of coming up with recommendations to make to the full council. So I don't want to preempt that work, but I do have thoughts, and I want to be transparent and just be the person that I always promised I would be. I am not in support of just cutting the police budget in town. I'm just not. And let me tell you why, and please give me the opportunity to tell you why. Our population is growing. We're adding, over a 5-year period, 1,200 units along the Bloomfield Avenue corridor. More businesses are opening and will continue to open. Montclair is getting more and more popular with hotels. When the pandemic is over, with our entertainment venues, dining. We are the center of culture, dining, and art for North Jersey. And I think we're only just going to get better over time. And so I need to understand and see what all of that does to pressures on our system. We have an incredible response time from our police department, and I would never want to see that impacted, because as we know from car accidents and shootings and everything else that takes place in our town, that response time is absolutely critical. And the complicated logistics that go into how officers are dispatched around town and the patrols and all of that is based on the number of police officers we have, the routes they're taking, the hours they work, the time off they're required to take, to hours off, et cetera. So we have to be very, very, very careful about that. But can we look at, and this is, I think, the important part of the question. It's all important, but this is the piece that I think gets a little lost sometimes. We can do both, right? We can reform how we do policing over time in town, and we can also look at how we address human services differently. But the thing I want to caution people about is, if tomorrow we decided to cut the police budget by 10% and increase the human services budget by 10%, the behavior that we're all used to in town, right? You see something, your instinct is to call 911. We're all used to doing that. There would need to be a massive shift in consciousness over what to do in a crisis before I would be prepared to reduce the police budget and move that budget over to something else. You would need all kinds of training and public education. And I'm not saying I'm against that. I'm just saying we have to be sober about what kind of change arc that looks like, right? So if we were to do a 311 number or something like that, that was less than crisis, that got mental health counselors or somebody from one of the churches that house our homeless people to come out to address a homeless person on the street. You know, the public would need to be trained on what number to call to address the situation. So I just don't think we have the infrastructure to do that just yet. Do I think we're capable of it? Absolutely. But what I'd like to see is, maybe the police budget sort of stays flat, right? Or doesn't grow as much as it always has grown. Maybe we don't cut it. And as a township grows, maybe we look at how we can try and fund additional human services. I do believe, and part of the reason why I shared my big idea earlier, or let's think big, is how I framed it in terms of a public safety center of excellence, is imagine a police station that's within a bigger municipal complex that includes a senior center and a community center and town hall and a town square that has all kinds of incredible features to it, right? So, a secure area for people to, for example, have a Craigslist swap or transaction, sell them, your iPhone or whatever it is, and you can meet somewhere where you feel safe. Have somewhere where you can be inconspicuous if you're filing a domestic abuse complaint or restraining order against someone. I think there's a way to redesign a police department to be much more interactive, and I mean a physical police department to be much more interactive with the public and to serve some of these other needs and services. And imagine again, if you have this larger complex, and within this complex, we do have counselors on staff that are working there. And so you bring somebody in, and maybe it's the cop who brings somebody in, maybe it's not, but you're bringing them to the same place. And then you have a counselor on spot who can deal with that. And maybe there's a couple beds in that same facility to help somebody who's having a crisis overnight, for example. So I'm really, really open. And Councilwoman Price Abrams, I know this is something that's dear to her heart. Councilor Russo, we've talked about this as well. Councilor Cummings and I have discussed it. We're all really passionate about doing human services better in Montclair and differently. We have usurped a lot of that responsibility, which is okay, to the county. That's not necessarily a bad thing. So in this sort of figuring out what Montclair governing is going to look like as we grow in the future, and thinking about shared services with our fellow towns nearby and shared services with the county, I think we just need to holistically look at how we do human services. And I think the more of those entities, the more towns, or maybe the county as a whole, doing that at once would be the better way to go, so that you don't have such a dramatic experience if you were to go, say, from Verona to Montclair, right? We don't want it to be so different. And look, our police officers are exceptional. They reflect a diversity of our township. Wonderful, right? We have 23, I believe, African-American officers, 7% Latino workforce, overrepresented there. And I get it. We don't legislate necessarily for the present, we legislate for the future. So we should be looking into what else we can do. Body cameras will happen. It's a matter of getting some additional funding from the state. And civilian review boards, the power was unfortunately gutted by the state Supreme Court of New Jersey. So we have the Civil Rights Commission and certain things they can do. But I'm not seeing a valid case or a strong case for a civilian review board at this time, but I'm absolutely open to continuing to have that conversation. I hope that answers that. I didn't want to, I want to be mindful of the time for everyone. This is the conclusion. There's obviously a lot to talk about. There's a lot of things that people are passionate about. I covered a lot of ground, from development to rent control to police reform to taxes to the pandemic. I hope if you didn't get to watch this live, or you did watch it live, you'll share this with other folks in Montclair to just continue the conversation. Have these conversations with your friends and your neighbors in town. Participate in your local government. We have a council meeting every other Tuesday night that you can join. You can make comments during the public comment period. You can ask us questions. Our email addresses and phone numbers are all on the township website, montclairnjusa.org, where you can ask us whatever's on your mind. Get together with people, join organizations that exist already, form new ones, advocate for the things you believe in, and participate in making this a better town for all of us. There's so much potential here. And last but not least, just please be safe and smart these last few weeks in the 11th hour of COVID. Let's make sure, let's not be April Fools. Let's get it right. Let's be strong and smart, and let's have a great summer and a great future for Montclair. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your time on this night, on this St. Patrick's Day. Happy St. Patrick's Day.